what we do. Okay, thanks, Christy. All right, so for today's session, we're going to share some of the things we tried in the last month. We tried to tell folks to try some way of student motivation to get folks more motivated to working in the classroom, to share our takeaways from the homework reading. Then we'll talk about our problem of practice that we've got and discuss motivating students. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Once again, our PLC timeline. We're currently finishing up motivating students for this month. Next month, we'll be going into multiple opportunities or tests and retakes. And then we'll finish it up in May and June with how do we make this change sort of work in our system and for our schools. We're going to do talk about motivating students. We're going to talk about a couple of different perspectives from what we talked about last session. And then we'll talk about what we've tried and our problem of practice. Pretty good about keeping our community norms, but just to keep them in place, keep them respectful, make sure we have equitable voices and that we work together towards the goal, especially in those problems of practice life. And now we're going to talk a little bit more about student motivation. We talked about it last time, gave a lot of different perspectives. Hopefully you got a chance to look at that. We have a couple more perspectives we wanted to add, and one of them is based on the feedback we got from the last session. Go ahead, Christy. So we have these ideas from another author. Go ahead and click on that one more time.
Yeah, I just wanted to provide another resource. This is a newish book for me, but I really liked what it had to say, so I wanted to share it. So I know it's on the slide. I'm just going to read it to you. The assertion that students will be taught about the real world through coercion using the gradebook is at best misguided. What if the use of the gradebook for behavioral compliance isn't absolute, as some educators believe it to be? What if there's another way? What if there is an alternative pathway in teaching responsibility without punitive grading practices, a better way to hold students accountable? And this really resonated with me because I hear about this a lot from teachers who are teaching kids about the real world, and this will come up with multiple opportunities also, that, they're going to just have to learn in the real world that you don't get second chances and you are held accountable for your actions. And it really, what teachers are talking about is using grades in a punitive way, as if that is preparation for students in the real world. It comes up again and again with multiple opportunities, but also just it's really demotivating for students to live in sort of a punitive culture like that. And so that's one of the ways that we've really, or I guess I should speak for my own classroom practice. One of the ways I've really noticed that I get more student buy-in and more student engagement is if there is just like a more holistic approach to working with the student, right? And grades, I mean, let's go back to our purpose of grades, right? From the very first couple of sessions where we talked about that. The grade reflects what the student knows and is able to do at any point in time, right? Behavior is reported on, but it's reported on separately. So when we conflate those things, or when we mix them, then we have, I feel like we have a demotivating effect, and then we don't have a clear picture of the student's ability because it is clouded with a bunch of behavior things. So this quote really resonated with me. And if we're teaching kids, if we're making claims about the real world, but we're not actually doing the educating part of that, we're just doing the punitive part, I, to me, that's problematic. So interested to hear your thoughts about it as we get into our problem of practice and just what have you tried and what's worked for you and what part has resonated. But I wanted to share that. There's a second slide here as well with it. The author goes on to say, conceptually, most, if not all, educators will agree about the need to teach students to be more accountable. I don't feel like I've encountered anyone who disagrees with that statement. Disagreement emerges on the how, the processes and practices for doing so. This book is about shifting educators' mindset from reactively distorting academic achievement grades when students fall short to proactively teaching students to be more accountable for their behavior. Yes, also resonated with me. And the author goes on to suggest these are the ways that we go about doing it. And then, that's what the rest of the book is about. Schools should teach, develop, nurture, and reinforce positive behavioral attributes and student accountability for these attributes as they do academic skills. Schools can shift the mindset by taking advantage of the three processes. And so the one I think that resonates most with us and what we're doing in this PLC is A, sound assessment practices. That's the multiple opportunities. That is clear descriptive feedback, timely feedback, students having a say in their assessment practice, all the things that we're talking about, they all seem to fall into A. B and C are more like building wide or systematized approaches that are sort of beyond the scope of this PLC. But there's a whole chunk of A in the book. And so if you're interested in reading more, I've got the picture of the book in the upper corner there, Shimmer, Tom Shimmer. Might be worth checking out.
Muted. One of the things that came up on the survey is there was several people who asked about what do we do when we're trying to motivate students who are saying they're bored, saying activities are boring, um, behaving like they're bored. And you know what I mean? It's like they're off task because they feel bored, they say they're bored. There are parts of science, like let's say practicing stoichiometry, that could be perceived by some students as being boring. So there's an article and it's linked at the bottom of the slides if you want to look at it fully, where they talk about like, hey, um, how does this work? And they said if you identify a rationale that talks about the value, why it's worth it, and communicate that to the students, it helps and help them build their own connection to it. It will help them power through the boring activities to get to the good stuff. And that the biggest part of it that made a difference is how you communicate that it needs to communicate in a way that supports autonomy. And I think it's a little bit worth talking a little bit more about what that means, because the words communicate rationale in a way that supports student autonomy. When I first read that sentence in the article, I was like, I have no idea. This is a bunch of buzzwords you've thrown together in a sentence. So let's go to the next slide so I can talk about it a little more fully. So the controlling communication, and I know I've even been guilty of this before, is like do it because there's going to be a test on it. It puts us all the way back to you're not doing it to learn, you're doing it to get a grade. Doing it because I said so was another one of those. And it's easy to fall back on those when we don't have a background to fall on. And they said for supporting autonomy that you need to help them find meaningful connections between their goals and values and sense of self and these uninteresting activities. They talked about finding a perspective of the students, acknowledging negative feelings, and relying on informal language. And I thought, like, that sounds really cool, but I wasn't still really sure what they meant. So I think on the next slide, I pulled out like an example specifically of what that looks like. And so what they did is they worked with a group of people and they looked at what their interests were and they came up with this was a lesson on teaching correlation, which some people find interesting, some people find dead boring. And they said learning about correlations has been shown to be useful. So that's that part of like, this is important. Those participants who learned about correlation featured in today's lessons have reported that it helps them become a more reflective teacher. This was connecting to where people wanted to be better teachers. They became more reflective because the lessons learned helped them see the relationships that the naked eye might miss. There's like a little bit deeper of why it does this thing that we told you. You don't have to just believe us. Correlations summarize vast information to help teachers explore issues, answer questions, solve problems, and make decisions. This is why many educational journals, internet educational websites, and textbooks present information using correlations. So it goes back to, this is why it's used everywhere and why we want to use it. For example, a quick glance at the newspaper yields statistics that communicate research findings on new teaching methods, parent-school relationships, new instructional technologies, student-teacher relationships, teacher average income, and so on. I liked that first part because it talks about, here are all the reasons why it connects to things that I know that you're interested in because you're a teacher. Now, when we have students, we'll have to go a little bit deeper into where are we reaching out to folks because they're students, because their interests may be a little bit broader and wider than we get when we're trying to go to teachers. But the other thing that I found was really fun from this was the second paragraph. Learning about correlations may not be much fun for some of you. So it is understandable that you might not find it interesting. It's funny in reading through several articles on this that acknowledging people's negative feelings and stating them outright somehow strangely puts people in a weird defensive space of saying, oh no, I don't find this uninteresting. It's not as uninteresting as you thought, which makes them more open to learning about it. Nevertheless, today's lesson is particularly designed to help you think about how two variables might or might not be related to one another and whether one variable predicts and causes the other. So we're saying, hey, you might not like this, you might not find it interesting, but I'm going to give you a lesson on it anyway. And once learned, the correlations featured in today's lesson will open the door for you to gain useful skills, ones that will be very handy when you need to interpret information presented through statistical tools. And this is the reason why you're being asked to concentrate, persevere, and try hard on the lesson. So it ties it back up to all those reasons why you want to do it. And since those are all things that like teachers care about, it makes them buy in a little bit more. And if we can find reasons that students care about and acknowledge that, like, stoichiometry might not be all that fun for you. Some people find it's a lot of math. And I know that that's going to struggle a little bit for you guys, and that's okay. But you will use stoichiometry as you try to think about scaling recipes if you want to be a baker, or if you're thinking about how you might want to modify an engine to make it more powerful for drag racing or for all these other activities. So I want you to try to concentrate and persevere because it's going to take you where you need to go in life. It's going to take you to a deeper level on the things you care about. I thought that was really interesting. You can read more about the article if you want to at a later time.
I was just gonna interject here really quick. This
Yeah.
reminded me a lot of when I do the um, build a table activity in Unit 2 with my students. In my classroom, I have multiple large periodic tables on the walls, right? And the point of build a table is that kids are moving the cards around and trying to reproduce some of the same patterns that Mendeleev saw when he was trying to organize the first 60 elements that were discovered. And I tell the kids straight out, like, if you look at the wall and you see how they're arranged on the periodic table, this activity is a complete and utter waste of your time, right? The whole point is for you to go through the process of trying to simulate the thinking. So you're welcome to look up there, but I also just want to acknowledge that I am not here to waste your time. I don't want to waste my time. And I think they just really appreciate the realness of the conversation, right? Like I'm just owning straight out, yep, the answer is on the wall. And if you look, you can. Like I'm not going to babysit you, but it's just going to be a waste of your time. And then I'm always excited that they really don't do that. They do really focus on what they're doing. And it's just that acknowledgement, just as Andrea said in the example, just acknowledging that this is happening is enough sometimes for kids to go, oh, okay, I won't look. I know that I can, but I choose not to. So anyway, just wanted to interject.
Yeah, and I started trying to play around with this a little bit in my classroom this week of just like, hey, today we're doing this warm up. And the whole reason we did this warm up today is because our lesson is about whatever the lesson's about. And so I want you to focus in on those pieces so that you can get the part of the lesson that's important. Not only do I have more students actively engaged in the lesson, but they're getting the things I want them to get out of it as well, as opposed to like coming at the end of the lesson going, I don't know why we did this. So I think there's something here, but definitely if you want to read more of the article, it's linked into the slides. So
There's one more thing. Sorry, Andrea. I know your
yeah, go ahead.
picture's on the slide, but there's one more thing I was thinking of. This do it because I said so. First of all, I just want to acknowledge that I catch myself saying that as a parent sometimes. So just going to own that right now. But also the do it because I said so is a power move. And that is, I I think, also demotivating for students because when we start getting on the power structure and who has power and who does not have power in the classroom, I think that's motivation takes a hit there. And instead of welcoming student voice and student ideas, so that there's ownership of their learning and there's this what it reminds me of is the homework, and teachers really find homework valuable, and teachers know how to do school, and they generally have enjoyed doing school, right? And so when students don't do homework, it's like, well, why wouldn't you do it? Like, that's fun. It's fun to learn and it's fun to practice. And how are you showing up here not having done your homework? And I think sometimes teachers use a power move, which is like putting things in the grade book, like homework, that really should be practice and formative. Um, and then that's, again, motivation takes a hit. So part changing the lens on that and inviting student choice, like, yes, here are 10 problems on the homework. Do as many as you feel like you need to feel like you've practiced enough. Is that 2 problems? Is that 5 problems? Is that 1 problem? You decide. And then come with questions next time and we'll talk about it. Is a is a better invitation to learning and is a better invitation to um, agency and self-control of their learning than do them all because I said so. And if you don't, power move on my part, I'm going to put it in the grade book. And, motivation slowly diving.
You
So,
could like tie it into like a lot of kids in my classroom are really big on winning the Kahoot, right? You could even be like, do the homework if you want to. If you're really fast at this and you already got it, okay. But we're going to have a Kahoot, and the answers for the homework are going to be the Kahoot, right? Then students who are motivated by wanting to win the Kahoot will do it when they didn't even care about the grade. All right, we're on to you.
excellent. So we wanted to share a couple of additional resources and things that we had been looking at since our last time together. Um, and we have about 13 people here besides you and me, Andrea. So that is like 4 groups, maybe, if you want to set up some breakout rooms, maybe 4 groups, 4 smaller groups. It's up to you. But just the idea was that you've gone back to your classroom since last time. You've tried something out around student motivation, and then you're bringing that back with you today in the hopes that you are comfortable sharing how did it go in your small group. So, same series of steps as it always is in problem of practice. Someone's presenting and people are asking clarifying questions, then probing questions. The group is discussing, and then there's some summarizing and some takeaways there. Um, we're recording those here so that we're all benefiting from what the groups are talking about, since we can't all be in every group. And then we will come back together and kind of look at those and debrief. It's almost 5 now, so we have a good while for this, which is great. And so even if you get to a point where a couple of people want to share because the groups are a little bit smaller this week, that's awesome too. And then Andrea and I will kind of be popping in and out just to be listeners. This is my favorite part because I get to hear and learn from other people. So, Andrea, anything you want to add to that?
Now that all sounds great. So if we have groups of about 4, that means there'll be some groups, most groups will be about 3 people in there. And if that sounds all right with everyone, then I'll go ahead and any questions before we open up the rooms? Okay. We're going to share some problems of practice around what we've tried to help motivate students. I'm going to go ahead and open those rooms now. And I'm going to pause the recording.
Back. There was a good chunk of time to have lots of good conversation. So we dropped into several rooms, and always the comment coming back was like, they are deep in conversation about some really good topics. So I'm going to share my screen just so we can look at what some folks said on the slide 17. So here it is. So group 1, the problem of practice, issues with student talk in the classroom, difficult to assess learning sometimes. Possible solutions, student talk protocols. And as soon as I read that, I thought of the PLC on student discourse that PMSP is doing. I don't know if any of you have attended that or thought about attending it, but it's amazing. I learned a lot about student discourse. There are so many talk protocols. It depends on what your goal is of the talking, of the student discourse, like what are we trying to get out of it? And then there's probably more than one choice of protocol for whatever goal you're trying to achieve. So in a pinch, you could also look at the recorded, webinar. It's like this one, it's a series, PLC series. And so you can watch the whole series on the PMSP YouTube channel. It's one of the playlists. So if you're curious about digging into that, I think it's student talk can be a motivation issue too. It can be a multitude of reasons, whether it's like students feel safe taking a risk in front of others. You know, it could be a variety of things. Motivation being one of them. Like what's in it for them, so to speak. Like if they're taking a risk in front of peers, like what is the motivation piece? What's intrinsically happening for them? Um, so that was group 1. Does anyone want to chime in with adding to that?
Yeah, actually, 2 of us are in that student talk PLC, and so that was kind of something we were talking about.
Great.
And it's tough because I've tried some of those student talk methods, and my students hate them. They fight them tooth and nail. Like we did the stronger, clearer one, and
Yeah,
they
yeah.
actually like they improved a bit using it, but like just getting them to do it was such a battle, and they just were not happy. Their mood went down after that, and it was just like, yeah, it was tough. Definitely some growing pains for sure.
They resisted you. Huh. I wonder if you asked them, if someone asked them like why the pushback, why the resistance. I wonder what they would say. If it was just a collective groaning about it or if it was, I don't know. I'm always so curious about what's the underlying reason here, you know? So curious. Group 2, rubrics and how they are used for getting students to be motivated to understand their grade. How do we convert rubric tests to a points value? How do we convert rubric tests?
Opposite. Sorry. Sorry.
I have to read that a couple of times. Say more about it. Say more.
So the problem of practice that we started with, we kind of circled around many different things, but was, you know, as we're trying to lean into these equitable practices, a lot of us have like points-based tests already made. So we're trying to look at what we have and the sequences of how students learn and turn them into like a rubric-based assessment. And what I was finding is it's hard to fit so many skills into a rubric. So our tendency is to simplify the assessment, and then we kind of fall into pitfalls from there. Like maybe we're not assessing the foundational skills anymore. Maybe we're giving students less opportunity to show the skill. Maybe we're doing the problem forward, but not backwards, which is layer of skill. And so we're just not sure how to fit all of those things into one rubric. And also, you know, I think the second layer we kind of went into from there was what happens if the kids can do the mastery level on the rubric, but they can't do the highly proficient level on the rubric, you know, and then does that mean we need to build our rubric differently, or is that just a common occurrence? So we talked for a while about rubrics and how to build them, and then we talked about how students use the rubrics, or if they're using rubrics, or if there's some guidance that like we could get the students to look more at the rubrics, you know, into that motivation piece.
Totally.
So,
yeah. Is the well, I had a thought when you were talking about simplifying it. I had a thought of, you know, the things that they might be doing on the assessment involve multiple pieces. More than likely, it involves multiple skills, multiple pieces of knowledge, but you might just be choosing to assess 2 of them, right? So in a stoichiometry problem, they're going to be balancing it. They're going to be converting to moles. They're going to be using a mole ratio. They're going to potentially find a limiting reactant, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But you might just be evaluating mole ratio and limiting reactant. But in your back pocket, that can also be another opportunity for balancing reactions, right? Kiddo did not get it in Unit 5, but now in Unit 6, they're showing me that they can. I'm not formally evaluating it for that, but I can evaluate it if I know that we need another opportunity for it, right? So there are multiple skills going into that problem, but you might just be choosing to evaluate 2 of them, for example, as one example. Is your gradebook set up for points or rubric scores?
We use an evenly distributed scale, and then we enter like we can't enter like P for proficiency or M for mastery, but we can enter like an A, B, C, D, F on evenly distributed scale. And so we just have a chart like proficiency equals a C, highly proficient equals a B. So our grade books are set up for rubric grading, but we're kind of manipulating a point system to do so.
Yeah, gotcha. Gotcha. Yeah, that's a tough one. How do we convert rubric tests to a points value? I'm not totally sure how to answer that because I usually only talk about it in the other direction. You know what I mean? How do I go from a points system to a rubric system? And then further, I don't want to go down this rabbit hole too far because couple other groups to talk about, but also thinking about a score on a test is a score and not a grade, if that makes sense. Like the grade doesn't come until I have the collection of evidence and I evaluate all of the levels of learning that are demonstrated in that collection, and then it gets translated to a letter grade, right? So I'm getting stuck there a little bit too. So feels like a longer conversation, but as far as the rubric and motivation, and I hear you on that, and I think the rubric is like it's a daily teaching, just like those beginning of year practices that we teach our students, how to ask to go to the bathroom, when to get up and sharpen your pencil, how to pick up a paper that you missed because you were absent, like all of those classroom management type things. I would put rubric in there too, how to use a tool to evaluate our understanding of this topic. And when we do an exit ticket or a bell ringer or a practice problem or a whatever, we get the rubric out under the overhead and we're doing it together. We're evaluating it together. They won't use it unless you train them. 100%. Totally agree. Awesome. That is some good food for thought for me. Thank you for including that. I love that. Group 3, our problem was getting kids to start with a challenge when giving a lot of instruction, which is bad and also puts them to sleep. Discussed, provide supports that lower inertia to start, like an easier entry point. Is that how I'm reading it? Okay, awesome. And plan probing questions and prompts that make their thinking visible and find their way. We're left wondering if redoing activities as a warm up later would help them see growth and be motivating. I love, 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 love that part. It reminds me of doing like a pre-assessment at the beginning of the unit when people don't know anything or very little. And then as we learn stuff, we go back and revisit parts of that. Like, it's amazing. Look what we can do now. We had no idea before. And now we're slowly building our knowledge, or like making a list of all the things we're learning and how it's building on itself, just so it's visual. Like, oh, I see how the pieces connect. I see all the pieces of knowledge that I have now, and just celebrating it. I know it's, cheesy in the front of the classroom and making a big deal out of stuff, but it is learning is joyful, right? Learning, it's exciting, and look at how amazing we are. Look at what, we're being scholars, and I don't know. I always got a kick out of that, making a big deal out of it in the classroom. Easy entry point, and then revisiting things just to demonstrate and celebrate what we've learned is huge. Also thinking about if you have a model of the phenomenon and you're adding to it and correcting it as you progress through the unit, I think is also really powerful, because you have a visual of what you're learning and how all the pieces fit together, and everyone's contributing. Like this is a group effort of learning and knowledge. That can be pretty powerful too. Finally, group 4, freshmen need to know how to do school, yes, to try and start caring, yes. They can't see multi-day activities as being beneficial on a test, yep. Showing them through an unweighted grade category might help with this. So like, I'm reading between the lines. So formative work, it doesn't go towards the grade, but it's still a documenting. Is that what group 4, am I understanding that part right?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Make science fun and like they can be successful at it, to encourage them to keep trying. Totally agree. I think that builds that intrinsic, like if you think about elementary age kids and the wonder and the excitement and the joy of learning and touching and doing and thinking, and just like, I feel like we beat that out of them as they progress through school. So how do we bring that back, that joy, and curiosity and wonder, and can it be that we're doing some things and there is no grade attached to it? It's just for the fun and curiosity and asking questions. I think all of that comes with some knowledge too, that of course we do have to have things in the grade book, but it doesn't always have to be really formalized. It can be through discovery, and then just talking about it, just asking questions about what they've learned. It can be informal like that as well, and lower stakes, right? So these are all really good ideas about ways to just infuse that curiosity again, or that trying to build that intrinsic motivation part. Those are great. And also, I think just having time to talk to colleagues that maybe are not in your building and share ideas is really valuable too. So thank you for participating in that. Let's see. So we're still on this motivational pillar, right? Our practices motivate students to achieve academic success, support a growth mindset. There's that intrinsic part. Give students opportunities for redemption, and are transparent and understandable. All of that builds on that motivation piece of students wanting to engage and have some control and say in what they're learning. So here's the book again, Redefining Student Accountability. That's the one we talked about earlier. I don't know this one, Andrea. Do you know these two? Do you want to talk about these two?
Yeah, so
That
I
I
thought
think
that
you
it might be
added.
kind of interesting to have like a book like Motivating Students Who Don't Care. This seems like a really cool book. I was reading through parts of it. I haven't read through the whole thing, but definitely I've started looking at it and I'm like, oh, there's some stuff here that I could definitely think. And then the last one is a podcast that's really about what boredom is. So if we're starting to think about like, if I know what boredom is, then maybe I have a better sense of how I can use that or turn that into something valuable for the students. So that's a different perspective rather than just being about education. So that's kind of why these are there. And
Our
then
next.
go
Mhm.
ahead. Your
Our
turn.
next meeting is March 21st, so just before spring break, we'll be meeting again. Same time, same, yeah, same. This time, though, we'll be looking at multiple opportunities. Hot topic, multiple opportunities. So we have 2 sessions to really kind of dig into that. We have a couple of optional readings for next time. Allowing test retakes without getting gamed. What a great title for an article. And redos and retakes done right. I was literally just talking with principals today from this book right here. Oops, getting blurry. This book right here, there's a whole section on retakes. It starts on page 165 if you have a copy. But it talks about it. It just makes a really good argument for why do we do those? Why should we demand that students do those? And ways to not get gamed, as this article is sort of mentioning. And then all the things that go with multiple opportunities, like capping the highest grade that you can get, or how many multiple opportunities, or like all the things that you hear teachers say. So I'm really looking forward to digging into that and looking at some ways to do multiple opportunities that maybe aren't just test retakes. A lot to say about this topic. So looking forward to that. We have an exit ticket here. Same questions, just sort of what are you leaving here today with? And what are you hoping to get out of multiple opportunities for next time? We have a general vision of where we're headed with that, but always appreciate specifics. If you're specifically looking for this, or like, I really want to see a multiple opportunity, what would that look like for, analyzing and charting data? Or some, it can be crazy specific too. And we can kind of dig in and think about that a little bit. So we can end our recording here. And then our last piece is to look